Well, good afternoon.
Yes, hello.
Such a pleasure to be here. I'm Janow, Dean of the School of International and Public Affairs. And it is a great honor to welcome you here today. Thank you very much for joining us.
And I apologize for being a few minutes late, but if we can extend over a little bit and make sure we get a proper time. But I do apologize.
Thank you. No, we fully understand New York congestion, hoping you'll solve that for us.
Yes, the correct answer is autonomous vehicles and self-flying airplanes, which will happen in your lifetime, but we can discuss that.
So, we're enormously fortunate to have Eric Schmidt, who is Executive Chairman of Google, with us today. And of course, few companies have had the kind of impact in the tech sector and indeed in the world that Google has had as we think about the search for information, the ability to communicate online by smartphone, and one day to get from place to place. Google has really changed how we live and work, and profound transformations in our economy and the global economy. Let me just say, I think you all know Eric's remarkable background since joining Google in 2001. He has helped grow the company from really a Silicon Valley startup to a global leader. As executive chairman, he's responsible for the external matters of Google, building partnerships, business relationships, outreach, technology, thought leadership, dealing with governments, and a broad range of business and policy issues. And of course, from 2001 to 11, you were the chief executive officer, overseeing technical and business strategy alongside Google's founders. And prior to joining, he was chairman and CEO of Novell and chief technology officer at Sun Microsystems. You chair foundations and various important groups like the New America Foundation, we know well, and Princeton, the Institute for Advanced Study, a board member of the Khan Academy, and a two-time author with The New Digital Age, co-authored with Jared Cohen. And we're here today to discuss a remarkable new book, How Google Works, which just came out in September. So we're catching you at the beginning of engaging, I think, the public around this book, which the journal has already declared is a must-read for anyone managing technology-focused teams. And of course, there is a lot of that here at Columbia. It's really a fascinating book about Google's culture and management and operating in the world. So I thought I would ask you a few questions to get us started and then open it up for you to ask what's on your mind. And let me start, since a lot of the book is about talent and creativity and managing innovation. And we have a room full of what you might call smart creatives who want to change the world. I'd like to just invite you to tell our audience, which is very interdisciplinary, students who care about policy and business and technology and energy and development, finance, many subjects. What is the key message that you want to convey about identifying and talent and fostering creativity in this generation?
So thank you very much, and thank you guys for being here. It's pretty clear that we need more of the kind of talent that makes change happen. And when you're in school, it's sort of conformist in the sense that they're the rules and you have to take your classes and you have to write your PhD or whatever. And I think what I've learned in the real world is that you have to protect the divas. And if you're a diva, right, I won't ask you to raise your hands, you know who you are. You're passionate, you care a lot about things, you're a little ornery when people get in your way, and you push, and you push, and you push. Now with those sorts of things, right, how do you feel about those kinds of people? Well, we think that those people should be identified, put in charge, and listened to, because that's how change happens. Now, we have public policy people and students here in the audience. What's the number one problem in America, aside from our political system? Economic growth. How do you create economic growth? Through entrepreneurs. The number one and only source of drivers of new jobs are small, fast-growing companies, called so-called gazelles. The big companies on a net basis don't create jobs, and the little companies that don't grow don't create jobs. The jobs that are created are small, fast-growing companies, typically venture-funded. That's the important point. So when we talk about the great business icons, and this has been true for decades, think of Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Larry Page, Mark Zuckerberg, I would argue Travis from Uber is another example. These are people who have created hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs. So even if you just care about the economic output, you want to identify and protect these people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, I was just rereading an article, an essay that Isaac Asimov wrote in 1959
Yes.
about the creative process. And
Yes, I actually read that.
uh-huh.
Yes, interesting.
So he was arguing there that really the best ideas come out of working alone, or he was positing that it was important that individuals work alone, because when you work in groups, that good ideas and bad ideas commingle, and in groups, there's an adverse consequence of airing the good and the bad, and that hurts creativity. How do you think about that problem?
So we would take his idea from 1959 and modify it in the following way. We would say that the most important thing to do is to have the best idea. And often the best idea does not occur in a linear process. It does not occur it does not occur in the normal meetings, right? It occurs on Saturday mornings when you have unstructured. Science of creativity is ideas come when you least expect them, right? When you wake up in the middle of the night and you have this brilliant idea and you write it down because you know when you wake up in the morning you'll have forgotten it already. And that's just the nature of the way the human mind works. So that's sort of observation number one, and he's referring to that. The second thing is that when you manage teams, you want to make sure that you don't manage a community to a standard. You want to manage to the best idea, not the average idea. So how do you do that, right? Well, you end up having to have a discussion. And by a discussion, I mean a robust discussion. I mean an argument, right? So you have to actually sit there in the meeting and you have to say, what do you think and what do you think? Now, for those of you who've been in business, what you'll discover is that in a meeting, managers basically spend all day in meetings, and they have 10 people around them, and 3 or 4 people do all the talking, typically male, I might add. And so as an executive, what you want to do is you want to recognize that the people who are not saying anything may have better ideas and call on them. And often the woman who never says anything actually has the most thoughtful, most innovative, and most clever idea, and then everyone else sort of says, "Oh yeah, that's great," and then they take it as their own. So your job as a manager is to get those. Another aspect of this is that you have to sort of ask for better outcomes. So here's an example. All the discussion about automobiles is around improvements in the cafe efficiency of 5 or 10%. Now these are material changes. But what I would like you all to do is build me a car that has 10 times better fuel efficiency. So you sit there and you go, how do I do that? And so we sit there and we have this argument and we talk about new materials and new propulsion systems and so forth. And we eventually take the best idea and we go at it and we get to 3 times. Now, in the government, that's considered failure because you set a goal and you didn't meet it. But from a business perspective, if you aim really, really high, then even if you get halfway, you've done something extraordinary. And that's, I think, what we have to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to shift a little bit, if I may, to Google in the world, because I think you have a very fascinating chapter about decisions.
Yeah.
And one of those important decisions was about China, which you consider in this book. And I think you may have argued that the positive effect of Google's presence in China would outweigh the negative effects of cooperating at a certain moment of time, but ultimately you pulled out. And I guess looking back at this experience, how would you frame the trade-offs and the decisions?
What's interesting is that we put this in the book not because of we wanted to tell people something new about the decision. The decision has been well covered. That 4 years ago we said sort of one country, two systems. We like Hong Kong. We're moving to Hong Kong. Okay, sort of got that. But it was more the process that we went through. So in my case, what happened, I'm the CEO, I have to work with Larry and Sergey, and I know all the other executives well. And I knew where Sergey was, and I was pretty sure I knew where Larry was, and I was pretty sure I knew where most of their executives were. So at that point, what do? You don't just decide, right? You have to have a formal process. So in our case, what happened was at 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, we actually spent a 3-hour meeting. The first hour and a half went through all of the details of the attacks by the Chinese government on Google in great detail. And at the time, they had attacked at least 20 other companies, and we studied that, and we're quite sure we had the facts right. So then the question was what to do. And everyone sort of debated, and it was pretty clear that people's minds were pretty well made up, right? That the viewpoints had solidified by all the data. And so my position was, okay, we have to have a vote. And we voted, the majority voted to pull out, and we did. Now, why go through that 3 hours if you already knew what the decision was going to be? Well, because at the moment we made the decision, everyone, including the people who didn't agree, had to go and implement in 2 days what was a very consequential decision. The board had to be consulted, notified, and so forth. The partners had to be consulted and notified. The engineers had to change links in a complicated way. Things had to be moved, and it all had to get done by Tuesday morning when it was announced. So we tell the story not so much to point at China and whether we like China or not. China today is fully blocked. So Google is fully blocked in China. So I would say that's a bad outcome from where we are today. And people are using Baidu and other services and so forth. But the important point is the company made the decision.
Yes, a profound one. You know, a lot of different parts of the book engage the question of data and how it's changing our world. And of course, as a great university, you know, we are training our students, we're investing in cutting-edge work around data. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about how you see the global landscape evolving around data localization and what its consequences are.
Right.
If we end up with a world of data localization, what does that mean for innovation?
So we have a great fear that the internet is going to get broken. And so the term data localization in this context refers to a requirement by governments or countries that the data be in their country and subject to their laws. The core issue with China was that the Chinese laws with respect to privacy and rights and so forth and censorship caused them to want us to put their, our servers in their country and to censor them and so forth, and we didn't like that. But many other countries would like that. Would like that. I'll give you an example. Germany announced that as a result of the NSA stuff, they would actually like to have Google servers in their country under the presumption that the NSA could not spy on Google servers in their own country. This is what they told us. So while I understand the objective, and I certainly am sympathetic with the fact that people don't want to be spied on by the NSA, because Google didn't like to be spied on the NSA, the fact of the matter is that we've solved it in a different way. And this has led to a whole new controversy. So these issues, right, whether they're privacy and data localization and the role of the state, have always been present in society and in technology. And there's always been concerns. However, there is something new. In 1975, a version of something called public key encryption was invented mathematically. Today, it is the basis of privacy. And because the internet has so many possible ways in which people can be in the middle of your transaction, these are called man-in-the-middle attacks, what's happened is the entire industry, led by Google and now by Apple as well, have gone to end-to-end encryption, including encryption at rest. So this specifically means the following. First, it means that if you have information that you would like to be kept private, the best place for you to keep it is in Gmail, right? And I say that without reservation, because we will make sure, we will do everything humanly possible to make sure that that information is fully encrypted. Gmail and your Google Docs and so forth are now fully encrypted at rest. So that means if someone, with a gun goes and takes the server and takes the hard drive and starts playing with it, they just get gibberish. And the math is such that the kind of encryption we're doing is not breakable in the lifetimes of us, as best we can tell. And our scientists are just as good as everybody else's, so I'm quite sure of this. And then recently, Apple announced that this month they're going to encrypt to the iPhone all the way end to end. And Google has had that facility for a while. We turned it on to default with our latest release roughly the same time. This has led to a firestorm of criticism from legitimate organizations like the FBI, who've said, you're making our jobs harder. And my attitude is, look, you guys, not you guys, the FBI, but you guys, the government, did this. What did you expect, right? So now there are people who are running around saying that what we would like to do is have trapdoors so that the federal government, who are legitimate and law-abiding, I'm sure, would be able to snoop and otherwise watch your information. How do you know, and how does Google know, that an evil government, someone other than the United States government and other than the National Security Agency, right, for example, might not also be in there? So I think the industry has, and this is completely legal. So I think that this is one of the consequences of the NSA and the Snowden affair. It's quite profound and very important to understand its sociological policies. And Google makes no, and I make no apologies for this. Our job is to protect our users from unauthorized and illegal snooping and backdoor attacks. And we've done so.
Thank you. I think one issue that, if you don't mind me straying from the book, but is very important and that you are very much at the cutting edge of, is of course this European case involving the right to be forgotten. And I just wonder if you could share a little perspective around that. You know, given the nature of how information resides on the internet, is it feasible and is it fair to impose that kind of burden? And or are there better mechanisms?
Again, an excellent question. Let's do a survey. Raise your hand if there's any information on the internet that's embarrassing about you at all. Come on. Come on. There's a lot for you. Okay, good. Okay. Raise your hand if there were a simple process to remove it. Would you choose to remove it? Yeah. Okay. So what does that tell us?
You've got a big job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me give you this. We've been running the Right to Be Forgotten hearings within Europe, and I've been the chairman of them. And we've been listening to Europeans on this subject. And an American would look at the laws that they've passed and say that's censorship, but that's not how a European views it. And they have very strong privacy rights, and the European Court of Justice found in May roughly the following. If you're not a public figure, which the majority of you are not public figures, and if the information is not of general interest to the public, a term which is ill-defined, and you're a European resident and citizen, which the majority of you are not, you may apply to Google, who will, in its own judgment, right, determine those criteria and remove it from Google. This information, by the way, will remain because of a way in which they classified Google versus newspapers in the newspaper. The specific case was a gentleman who had a tax problem involving paying taxes for his house in Spain. What a surprise. And 20 years ago. And this tax judgment, which was an implication of illegality, was around, and it was written up in the newspaper. And he won a case which was a specific order to have that information removed from Google. So it's true that it's out of Google, but it's not true that it's out of the world. And so my opinion, having now done the meetings, talked to everybody, is that this was a very clever decision by the Europeans, because the politicians don't need to be in the middle of the right to be forgotten versus the right to know. And the decision put Google as the decision maker We've had about 155,000 requests. That number is increasing as people learn about it and so forth, and we have to follow the law.
Yes.
All of us in the industry believe that tinkering with the internet is a very, very dangerous road to go down, because you could imagine this particular right, and then you could imagine other rights. And there are roughly 44 countries that do forms of censorship of the internet. And as an example, there are many authoritarian regimes that use, under the guise of protecting people against adult pornography, it turns out their definition of adult or child pornography includes an awful lot of political speech, right? So they understand what they're doing, and they're trying to make sure that, that the internet is not used to do this. Russia has now gone through a very, very restrictive period, and in the last 6 months, it looks like Russia is going to be very tough on this. Mm-hmm. They have some very, very tough laws in the books, and they started focusing on Twitter, and perhaps they'll focus on others as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for addressing that. Let me ask one last question. Just a bit of your book ends with consideration of the government and how policies matter, and you talk about regulation and immigration. But you know, Silicon Valley is the envy of the world, the wonder to so many jurisdictions. Coming out of that culture, what's the role of policy in supporting an innovation environment?
I think we know now roughly what the right solutions are in order to get this stuff going. I think the first one I would offer is immigration. In the list of stupid things that the US government does, at the very top has to be the fact that people come to Columbia, they're highly educated, and then we kick them out of the country, right? I mean, that's got to be the top of the list. I mean, come on, guys, right? And these are people who would remain in our country, they would found companies, they would become great citizens, they would pay lots of taxes and, you know, reproduce, and off they go. Right? It's the American dream, and we're making it impossible. We've been fighting that issue for 20 years, and there have been various proposals like staple the green card to the PhD. Okay, that didn't pass. Okay, so like we don't want more people with PhDs. I mean, come on, we need education. I think so that's point number one. I think point number two is that the educational system is lagging what is needed in STEM. And if you look at the number, one of the issues with Europe, going back to Europe is underfunding its research universities, its graduate schools, and so forth relative to America. But what's the issue with America? We're underfunding relative to Asia. And furthermore, just on a numeric basis, they have a larger number, and therefore, assuming a normal distribution of IQ, right, they're going to have more smarter people who will be crazy enough to create all these new companies. So we have a very serious issue over the next 20, 30 years of the rise of Asia and the rise of Asia technology because of overinvestment relative to us there. Yes. That's got to get fixed. And then there's all of the issues of K through 12 education and so forth. Then there's one more. And this is an area where the US is a good example, and Google has done well, but I'm worried about it. And it has to do with overregulation. The best example I can think of here is that in, well, there are two good examples. We'll use Uber, which everybody will understand, and Spectrum. Mm-hmm. Uber is easy to understand because Uber is the true innovator in these sort of sharing transportation models, and Google, as a matter of full disclosure, Google is an investor in Uber, and we're all friends. And so we're sort of guilty by association. And Uber is now available in the majority of cities in America and is blocked in a number of places in Europe. And in every case, it's a very straightforward argument. It's not a consumer argument. It's an incumbent argument. And for a modern capitalist system to work, you have to not protect the businesses. You have to promote competition in favor of consumers. Let's look at Spectrum. There's a new idea around Spectrum. Everybody here uses iPhones or Androids, and everyone spends all their time on mobile computing. It's this huge revolution, right? All the models say that we're going to run out of spectrum between 2016 and 2017. And this is after having sold, you know, billions of dollars of extra spectrum, turning off those channels in UHF between 60 and 69 that everybody watched, and we repurpose them, and so forth and so on. Now, why is this? It's because the spectrum isn't shared. And the new technology allows for spectrum sharing. This is roughly the same as when you're using your phone, you're the only car on the highway, whereas in the new technology, you'd be sharing. So you sit there and you go, this is a brilliant idea. The White House, I was part of a group that did a report on this. The facts are clear. The problem is there's no spectrum that allows for the experimentation of the sharing model that would solve this problem. So I can give you example after example of that, where because the internet was unregulated, you've got a situation where you have this incredible competition between Apple and the Android phones, from your perspective, Apple and Samsung, which has brought products down at this enormous rate, right? Millions and millions of apps on top of it. Why can't we get that level of innovation in other industries? And a lot of it is either poor regulation or regulation with too much detail, which sort of specifies outcomes and so forth. One more thing, since this is a public policy audience. For a decade, the T1 speed was regulated at 1.5 megabits, and there were entire companies formed to do unregulated connectivity at 1.4 megabits. Right? It was a complete artifact of regulation. Another example, where is the majority of data going today? Where does Wi-Fi live? It lives in an unregulated band. The majority of your internet connectivity goes through an unregulated band. The regulated bands, which are far more plentiful, are far less full. I mean, I can go on.
Thank you very much. Well, let's open it up for a few questions. Please, no speeches, real questions. Start over here.
Thank you very much for the insight. I want to ask two questions actually. So first, as an engineer, software engineer yourself, which, if any, of the Google products do you improve and how? And the second question, and more of a tip and advice to us. I believe that most of us in this room would like to be able to work for Google, but as non-engineer, non-developers, non-coders, how could we attract Google and how could we convince you that we can be a great addition to the wide variety of functions within Google? Thank you.
So the first question was, how would I improve Google's products? And I'll talk a little bit about that.
One product, if any.
Oh, there's lots of Google products. I'll talk about some of the features there. But let's talk about employment first. Google has the luxury of being able to hire really, really very smart people. And I'm always struck by that. And we don't hire friends of friends. We hire the way universities work, where we have hiring committees and so forth. And in many cases, the engineers that come into the company don't even know what product they're going to work on when they're interviewing. And often the executives, salespeople, and so forth. So we basically say, we're looking for the person. And in the book, we spend a fair amount of time saying, the way you should hire people is about the person, not about the knowledge that they have. And the example that we use here is hire general purpose smart people rather than specific people with a lot of specific domain experience. Because you never know, but a really smart person will figure it out and they'll be able to change with the facts around them. That's how we do it. So roughly, as a general number, roughly half of the people we hire are technical in nature, roughly half are non-technical. For the non-technical things, we're looking for people who have great insights, they're quick thinkers, they write well, and they're aggressive in what they do. They have a vision, they're curious. In the book, we talk about something called smart creatives, where we say you need to know something about something technical, to have some kind of business affinity, and you have to be curious. And that's what we sing for. In terms of products, there are the products are never done, right? But I think the most interesting stuff will be in how search gets better because of artificial intelligence. As the computers get smarter and as they be able to, they can answer questions like, do I really want to be in New York today, or would I really rather be in DC? Do I really want to be at dinner, in the north side or in the uptown or downtown? Those kinds of questions will be possible to ask in the next few years, and our technology is getting better and better and better.
Over there, please.
So, Eric, I have a great business idea.
Could you stand up, please?
Yeah, why don't you-
It would require $3 million in capital to get up and running. It would probably generate about $30 million in revenue. So, and create 100 jobs. So, what should I do about that? Or is the fact that I'm asking this here mean that I should focus elsewhere than being an entrepreneur?
Well, the first place is that we need more entrepreneurs like you. The country needs entrepreneurs for many, many reasons. It's how, and again, given that nothing changes in the government, right, the story of America will be built by entrepreneurs like yourself, right, who have this, well, but you're clearly an entrepreneur you're sort of ready to be an entrepreneur, okay? So let's talk about the money. There are plenty of places to get money now. The world is awash in venture money. There's all sorts of secondary ways of doing it. Most successful entrepreneurs raise a small amount of money from friends and family in order to get to a proof of concept, and then they go and raise a series, first round. And they figure that, well, you may not have a choice. But hear me out. So the typical model is you have your idea, you raise some money, you do a proof of concept, right? And then you go and you raise money. Entrepreneurs spend an awful lot of time raising money. And the other thing, and we talk a lot about this in the book, is the quality of hiring. And the venture capitalists will look at your idea, but more importantly, the quality of the people that you can recruit.
Thank you. The head of Columbia Entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. So to what extent, how would you assess the digital literacy of the people that you come in contact with other than programmers or specific engineers, the doctors and lawyers and business people? And to the extent that you think it would be necessary, do you think it's appropriate that universities like Columbia or others try to bring up the level of digital literacy in their student body and their alumni base?
Well, as a general rule, people who are older, who are non-technical, are not very digitally literate, and they sort of just do the best they can. The best picture is always the 6-year-old teaching his or her grandmother how to use the Mac. Right? I mean, that's sort of one of the iconic images of America today. You know, literally the grandchild, right, teaching the grandparents. This is a wonderful metaphor. So I am strongly in favor of universities doing roughly the following. I think universities should have a data analytics and computer familiarity class, which is given to pretty much every freshman and or the majority of them. And data analytics here means the ability to understand how computers help make decisions, what statistical inference is, the general world of big data, because this is the world people are coming in. And then some kind of familiarity with programming, at a minimum web programming. And a lot of universities are beginning to talk about that. And that, I think, addresses the core level of digital literacy for people who are non-technical is they have to be able to not be surprised by things. They have to have a basic understanding of what computers are doing, but more importantly, what's being done with their information and how inferences are made. If you think about a student today here at Columbia, over 20 or 30 years, the advances in the ability of analyzing and using machine intelligence against big data are going to be profound. So every one of these people will go into a business which is going to be using those to make their businesses more profitable, more targeted, and so forth. So they need to understand that.
And government. You haven't mentioned the government in the context of using analytics.
Well, governments are very slow to incorporate these things. And so I think in general, we're probably better off focusing on the private sector and then letting the government contract with the private sector for these sort of services.
Thank you. Yes, please. Actually, I was pointing to the lady behind you.
That's okay.
I'll come back.
I wanted to ask how you decide in which product you have to be a first mover or you have to be a last mover.
We never use those terms.
But I see that like in Gmail and all the other things, like after Google search, there is no other search engine like Google. Whereas I see Google Earth, you always take advantage, like nobody else came after you.
So
like
so far those are all number ones.
Yeah, so like how you define which product and how you, like if there are already multiple products in the market, then how you decide that, okay, now how we are also the added on entrant in the market and how you decide to be pioneer in the market.
So we talk about this in the book at some length, and the core idea here is that it used to be, as an entrepreneur, that you had things to worry about like distribution or money or brand. And what we say in the book is the only thing that matters now is great products, right? That this is about creativity and engineering and building products. And the example I would offer is that there's a huge number of new brands that have emerged because of the internet. The internet allows you to reach everybody without gatekeepers, right, which didn't used to be the case. And people are willing to adopt new things if they solve new problems. So you should judge Google's efforts by whether the products are exceptionally good. And I would argue the two that you named, Search and Gmail, and I would add Chrome and Android and a few others, are just better. And we're very proud of that. So we spend all day trying to do that. We don't use the first mover, last mover arguments at all. And if there's incumbents in a market, we try very hard not to do what they're doing and try to do something different. And if we don't have an idea of something doing different, we're probably better off not doing it. And that's part of our secret.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sir?
There's a common second machine age argument that there might not be jobs for a large swath of the population in the next 20, 30 years. How true do you think that is, and what is the role of government and industry in addressing that?
So there's a large meme in the economics profession and among the sort of elites that think about this that goes something like this. There's a great deal of evidence of hollowing out of incomes, that the elites, knowledge workers, people in power, so forth and so on, have done pretty well, and that the manufacturing jobs, which used to be plentiful, have gone away or are going away, and they're being replaced by a large number of lower-paying service workers. And there's a very well-known study by a guy named David Autor, A-U-T-O-R, of MIT, which is, I think, pretty accurate, which basically is the basis of this. These trends, by the way, are not new. They've been going on for, manufacturing jobs have been in decline for many decades. And indeed, healthcare is a larger supplier now of jobs than manufacturing in America. Shouldn't surprise you given the amounts of money we spend on healthcare. So that all makes sense. So then we get to the guessing. And the guessing is that this change is permanent and that the people who are being displaced will not be able to take advantage of the higher income knowledge worker jobs, and they'll be forced into these service jobs in the future. And that's a matter of guessing or prediction. We don't know. So we have a rule at Google that we always start meetings with data. And if you don't have any data, we'll just use my opinion. Right? So it's sort of a different concept of running things. So since we don't actually have any facts, I'm right. So I'll tell you what I think, and you can decide if you agree with me. I think that the negative cast of the argument, which is the way you phrased it, is in fact wrong. This is my opinion. And here's why. Google and other companies are working very hard to make everybody smarter. That includes the uneducated people. That includes the people who did not have the benefit of going to an Ivy League university. That includes the people who did not get a graduate degree. That includes the people whose English is poor. And all of these people who somehow we are shunting into service jobs. There's an awful lot of evidence that people who work with computers make more money than people who don't. So I would argue, this is my opinion, because I don't think there's any facts here, and I've looked for the facts for the last 6 months. And I've met with all the economists, so I think I really have been trying to answer this question. I believe that there will be lots of interesting new kinds of jobs because of the technological dislocation, and that this time it's not different, right? That these dislocations are normal, that as a society, this is why we have an educational system, this is why we focus on entrepreneurs and all those things. So,
thank you. You should come back. We have vigorous debates around these issues, and lots of interesting nuance.
But it's a good debate, and the reason I came to my view is that everyone else was so depressed. No, nobody's going to have any jobs. The computers are going to take over everything. There's no precedent for this.
Yes, yes.
The reality is that there are these huge dislocations in history. It's been going on for hundreds of years, and basically society is full of very smart people, and we adapt, right? And some people get left behind, and we try to sort of help them with social services or their families or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, this is capitalism.
Yes, I'm with you. You are standing up. So, please.
My name is Lan Qing. I'm from the Newtown Dynasty Television. When Google moved out of China, a lot of the Chinese users mourned over the loss, and they even give a lot of flowers, as we can see. And when you mentioned that one country, two systems, Google chose Hong Kong. Our people in Hong Kong now is covering in a 24/7 manner about the umbrella movement. So far, we only hear about the people in entertainment business voicing their support. I wonder, what do you think the business people could do or would do to push and make changes in the situation in the world today? Thank you.
I'm not enough of an expert about the actual politics of Hong Kong right now, but I do know that we have a vibrant and healthy business in Hong Kong and in Taiwan, and I do know that our services are largely blocked in China. And there's no confusion as to who's doing that blocking, right? It's deliberate by the government because they don't want our services in China. I and others are trying to make that decision changed. And I think that's probably all I should say about China. China is a different system. I've spent a fair amount of time there. I think I met all the leaders and so forth. And I think it works for many of the Chinese people, which is why it persists.
Maybe we have time for one more question.
We have as much time as you like.
Oh, okay, very good. Right in the front.
I would like if you could help us think about a problem as follows. Universities produce knowledge. They have for several hundred years quite successfully. They produce it on the assumption that the way they produce the knowledge is important as the knowledge itself.
Okay.
And we share that with everyone. I share with you my experimental design. I share with you my sampling frame. I share with you my radiocarbon dating, et cetera, et cetera. You produce knowledge, but you don't share with us the process by which you produce it, because it's a trade secret. The algorithms are trade secret. We fully appreciate that. You have every right to do that. But how are we going to work together when we have a fundamentally different idea about what has to be transparent from what the private sector producing knowledge has?
I think I understand your question. I'm not sure what the issue is. Because from Google's perspective, our services are free, and we are incredibly proud of the universities and students and so forth using all that information as much as they possibly can.
The issue is if Google says the flu epidemic has this shape and CDS says it has this shape and CDC tells us how they produce that piece of information and Google does not, then we are in a bind as a society.
I see.
And I don't know what the solution to that is, and that's why I'm asking you to just help us think out loud about that.
No, I understand. I think from the vast majority of what Google does in the way you're framing it is not producing knowledge, but rather organizing the knowledge of others, right? So the algorithms that are the ranking algorithms, which we keep as proprietary and trade secrets, we want to do that, but that doesn't mean that we're blocking or preventing any knowledge transfer. In the case of flu trends, for example, we did actually publish the nature of the algorithm, but it would have been a violation of our privacy policy to talk about the specifics, because we didn't want to cross that line. So again, I'm not sure that that's such a big deal. I think indeed we don't do very much of that in the scheme of things, and the vast majority of information is broadly used. So I guess I'm not sure I agree that it's such a big issue. We want to work very, very closely with faculty members, researchers, and graduate students. We've worked hard to publish APIs that will give people access to internal systems consistent with not screwing up people's privacy. So.
Sir.
Hi. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the national field and how Google sees that technology being applied.
It's best for me to simply say that we're extremely interested in 3D virtual reality and leave it at that.
Okay.
Hi. In a world where fewer than 5%, I think, of venture capital from partners are women, and less than that of companies that have received funding have female CEOs, what do you see as the role for women in this great entrepreneurial landscape?
So we have a problem in my industry, which is that the percentage of women participating is declining. And this has occurred at the same time that women have made phenomenal contributions in biology. The majority of biology PhDs are female. The majority of doctors are now female. There are 58% of the students in college are female. Right? So there's some kind of a problem in our industry. There have been many theories as to what the problem is, but I think we should start by saying we have a problem. Some of them involve teenage boys versus teenage girls. Some of them involve theories that there are unconscious biases or certain stylistic aspects. And then the traditional issues around childcare and others, which are all very important. So I would say to you that the way to solve this problem is to solve the problem from the standpoint of the woman. In other words, try to figure out why women are either not getting into these jobs or they're not staying in the jobs, because it's a ladder. And they fall off the ladder for reasons that are personal and complicated. And try to figure out how to solve each and every one. So in Google's case, we have a very extensive childcare program, which we're very proud of. But that doesn't seem to be sufficient. It seems to be necessary, but we need to come up with some more ideas. I don't have more to say there. A lot of people have worked on this, right? And it seems a very hard problem.
Sir.
A lot of the tools and projects that Google offers are meant to kind of combat corruption and authoritarian regimes. And I'm curious what happens after the fighting stops. Is there a role for Google and the internet to play in post-conflict societies that help the same people you're helping during conflict kind of reconcile and move forward post-conflict?
Well, Jared Cohen and I wrote a book on this subject, the first book, and we talked a lot about the use of technology in reconstruction. There's a great deal of evidence that the best thing you can do is have the equivalent of a digital Marine Corps. And the equivalent of the digital Marine Corps lands on the beaches and makes the wireless network work. Right? That post-conflict societies have enormous human problems. And again, the simplest example is think of the current Ebola tragedy. Imagine if those countries which are among the poorest on the earth had very high connectivity of smartphones. We would have been able to save thousands of deaths with respect to knowledge, monitoring, tracking, all the kinds of things that you can do with smartphones. But because these are disconnected societies among the generally poor people, you have all these sort of horrific things that are happening. So Google has done a whole bunch of stuff with respect to Haiti, for example, rewiring Haiti after the terrible accidents there. And I think, but the right thing to do is to think of it as, in these dire situations, connectivity is a huge benefit. It allows the NGOs to get themselves organized. There were reports in Haiti that until we showed up that the NGOs didn't quite know where to go because the maps didn't work, and that people were being, these people were being seen 5 times and these other people were seeing 0 times. So you can sort of implement these sort of systemic rescues, if you will, whatever you want to call them, in a very methodical way on top of technology called Ushahidi, which is phenomenal, right? Which is a nonprofit that's based in Kenya.
Let me ask you, we haven't had a question about cyber risk, and I wonder if you could just offer some thoughts on managing cyber risk. Do you see a world evolving where we can do that, or is there just an inevitable dark future arriving around cyber risk, cyber war, the use of cyber terrorism?
What's interesting is that we seem to have evolved to a situation where you can have low-grade cyber conflict while having most favored nations between countries. So there's a great deal of evidence in the public domain that China, America, Israel, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and so forth, all engage in various forms of all of this. And so the question I would pose, which is a variant of your question, is when does the cyber stuff become real war, right? And my own opinion is that there's some kind of line that we're now establishing, that it's okay for intellectual property theft between countries, which obviously we oppose at Google and I oppose, but somehow we tolerate that, but we would never tolerate the murder of a citizen by the same people. So there is some kind of line. And the military talks about it in terms of cyber versus kinetic. And their term for conflict is the word kinetic. So there's some kind of barrier that has emerged. America has worked very, very hard to make our systems much stronger, the banking system, the power system, and so forth. And I think we're actually in pretty good shape. You never know. And I would tell you that if you want to make yourself immune from all of this, you should use Chrome. Okay? Now, why should you use Chrome? By the way, it's free. Okay? Price is good. It's also faster than anyone else. Always good. But the real reason is because Chrome has the most sophisticated checks for the kinds of attacks that are being used today. So start with using Chrome, and then another thing that you can do is something called two-factor authentication. Google has offered this for a while. Apple just introduced this. And two-factor authentication means that you not only do you have a password, but occasionally they have to text to your phone a secondary number, which, since everyone here lives on their phones, is not such an inconvenience. And that will very much guarantee that you're going to be safe.
Thank you. One last question. In the back there, please.
First of all, as a fantastic student, I wish you luck on the aviation reforms and hope that it carries out quickly next week. On a more general question is, in terms of Google ideas and in terms of the role that Google can play increasingly in terms of maybe diplomacy of a certain different kind. You know, the kind where organizations can actually impact democracies and other governments. Like, so these two fronts, like, what is your view and where does Google go to?
Well, it's a good question, and I think that the simple answer is that the internet is an enormous positive force for keeping governments, companies, and citizens honest. Right? It's just enormously positive. A lot of bad stuff occurs in secret because people don't want to write it down. They don't want to be held accountable. And again, in our first book, The New Digital Age, Jared and I talked a lot about what would happen. You can imagine scenarios where you have some terrible tribal war. You could begin the war crime trial before the conflict is over because there's so much evidence of bad things. There are plenty of examples of this. But one of the sort of core ideas here, look at death rates of conflict. Death rates have declined quite dramatically. So we had a revolution in Ukraine, a revolution in Egypt, and so forth. The number of people who ultimately lost their lives in these very complicated and very, very courageous sorts of interactions was really quite small. And I believe that the television generation, plus the internet generation, plus the fact that people had phones, has materially improved that. And if you want to think of the easiest example is to think about a woman in a country where women do not have a lot of rights and where the local authorities are tough and non-responsive. With that smartphone, she can achieve both safety, but more importantly, document whatever abuses she sees around on her own person or among her community. The transparency does, in fact, police the extremes, right? The crazy men that want to stone people, and that kind of thing. The crazy people who want to sort of kill people, the Nazi kind of mentality. All of that is far, far harder to do. I would argue that the internet is this extraordinary force at a political level. And I'm very happy to be part of that. It presents issues like the ones we're talking about. But imagine a world where you didn't have it and you didn't know these things were happening. You don't think they were happening now before? Of course they were. They're happening less now, even because you're more aware of them. And that is what is so extraordinarily good about the internet.
Thank you for being with us.
No,
It's
thank
been a
you. Thank
great
you all for this, and
conversation.
thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful.
You're the director of entrepreneurs. I love the director of entrepreneurs.